Welcome back, everyone. So let's leverage our start, success, and fail action types inside of our category actions. So what we need to do is we need to first create these three new actions. So first of all, one is going to be fetch categories start. And as you guessed it, this is just going to be the action, of course, that tells our application, or rather our Redux store, that we are starting to fetch categories. Here, what we're going to do is create an action, and all we need to give it is the fact that this has the type start. There's no payload required. Our reducer already knows that the moment we see this action, all we're going to do, set loading to true. That's all it is, nothing else. So here, that is our start action. The next ones we need are going to be success and failure. So let's define success first. So here, inside of success, this is pretty much going to be what we had here. Except instead of set categories, we are triggering this action as the success action. Similarly, the payload that we're going to pass to it is going to be the categories array, which is what we want to send through. Next, what we need is fetch categories failed. So fetch categories failed, of course, we'll call the correct. And then we're also going to pass error as the payload. And now we have our three methods. What we need to do is we need to now figure out how to create the thunk action that will trigger the correspondingly correct actions. So these three are synchronous, and they're not even thunks, they're just regular actions. A thunk is going to be an action that we say specifically fetch categories async, like this. I like to call them async. In fact, Redux Thunk also recommends that you declare your thunk actions with that last word async, so that we can look at this action creator function and know that it is indeed something that is asynchronous and a thunk. So as I mentioned, it's just a function that returns a function that gets a dispatch. This function can in fact be an async function, which is what we're going to use. Because with this async function, what we want to do is we want to be able to determine how we are fetching these categories, what to do when it succeeds, and what to do when it fails. Currently, we have this functionality inside of our shop component. This is all we actually really need, because this dispatch, instead of happening here now, we're going to do it inside. So first, let's bring in our get categories and documents. And now what we're going to do is we are going to wrap this entire function inside of a try catch block. Because what we're saying is that, hey, I want you to try and run this asynchronous method. If at any point inside it throws an error, which it will, if our await call on getDocs for some reason fails, then this async function is going to throw an error, which we will then catch. So here, this is pretty much our basic format. To begin with, the first thing that we're going to do is we are going to dispatch the fact that we started fetching the categories. So we're going to dispatch calling our action creator fetch category start. And then what happens is that inside, if we succeed from this await call, then what we're going to do is say fetch categories success. And here what we're going to pass to it is the actual categories array. And then, of course, if we have an error, we will dispatch our fetch categories failed and pass the error through. I also forgot to wrap this in a dispatch as well. So this is our new asynchronous function. This is our thunk. So what I want to do is use this inside of the shop component. So instead of calling set categories, I'm going to say fetch categories async. And we're of course still going to dispatch this as our action creator, but now we don't need this anymore. In fact, this function isn't even asynchronous anymore. It's just a regular dispatch that triggers the moment this component mounts. And now, if I save this, now if we come back to our application, here we very clearly see that our action is being logged. Now, of course, this is Redux Logger, so there is no type to define because it's just a function. So here, though, what we see is we are indeed dispatching this asynchronous action as a function. And then further down, we see, oh, there's our fetch category start. And then right here, down here, we see fetch category success. Payload is indeed our categories items. And then we see our categories gets updated with the correct array. So this flow is the way that we now have hooked into our actual Redux flow with a thunk. And what we've really done is we have essentially moved out the synchronous and loading code into a thunk instead. This means that all of this asynchronous behavior of fetching is all handled by Redux now. Because through this thunk now, this shop component does not have any need to understand or maintain and balance any async await actions or any of the actual asynchronous coordination. All of that is now just driven by an event. All our component knows is that the moment I start, I'm just going to dispatch an event to say, hey, start fetching something. Whether or not it succeeds or fails is not governed by our actual component anymore. That now all lives inside of this middleware, which is a very clean separation of logic. It allows us to get even more granular and individual contribution of each of these different functions now, because now this responsibility is no longer up to our component. Our component simply consumes data and shows data. Here now, inside of Redux, is how we actually fetch that data. And this is why there's a very popular move towards bringing in a asynchronous Redux library like Redux Thunk when you get to a point where you want this action-driven architecture and you want to separate out this asynchronous behavior. It typically happens when your project scales quite large and you have a lot of asynchronous behavior happening in your application. And this is what we've just done. We have moved out that category fetching into this action creator. So now that we've done this, the next thing we need to do is figure out how we can leverage the loading value that is inside of our category reducer to make our code a little bit more UX friendly. So that's what we'll do in the next video. So I'll see you there.